I'm grateful again for this wonderful opportunity of being at the Heart Cry Conference. By God's grace, I've been privileged to be at each one and to have an opportunity to open my heart and the Word of God to those who have come. Now, I've been thinking and praying a great deal about this particular conference. When it was all agreed upon, I didn't know but we were going to have two duplicate conferences. And so we would simply be repeating next week what we had this week. And then later on it became apparent, no, they weren't going to be duplicate at all. And then I was, wrestling with the matter. Well, how should I handle my part of it? What ought I to do in the light of this? And I've decided to do what might seem to be perfectly absurd, but you'll probably never encounter anybody less concerned about what others think than me. And so what I'm going to do, God helping me, is to give a series of 4 messages on the subject of divine visitations, 2 this week, 2 next week. I honestly think it will prove beneficial for those who will not be here next week to pick up on this theme over the internet, as we've been told we could, or by whatever appropriate method. My parents, when I was a boy of 8 years of age, were profoundly converted. My mother had no spiritual background at all. My father was of Welsh descent and had a very godly heritage, but he had departed from it and paid no attention whatsoever until a strange incident occurred. For reasons never quite clear to me, my parents sent my older sister and my brother and myself to a Methodist Sunday school in Scotia, New York. We came home from Sunday school one morning and reported to our mother that we had been learning about the fable of Jonah and the whale. My mother was shocked, and she said, and these to me are incredible words from a know-nothing spiritually. She said, "We do not send children to Sunday school to make them unbelievers. We are all unbelievers by nature." And then she added, "You will never return to that Sunday school." But in the providence of God, at just about that time, and aunt and an uncle were putting pressure on my parents to attend a series of special evangelistic meetings in the Christian and Missionary Alliance Church in Schenectady, New York. And they went, and God transformed their lives. They were immediately drawn into a cottage prayer meeting and went faithfully, and somehow I never quite understood why, except again the providence of God. I became greatly interested in that cottage prayer meeting and attended, as far as I know, the only child there. But somehow, through that cottage prayer meeting, I caught something of the beauty of holiness and something of the urgent need of revival. I believe in actual truth I had been regenerated, but not yet converted. Now, I know that some of you use those terms interchangeably, I think you do damage to the kingdom of God and the gospel of Jesus Christ by foolishly abusing the language of Scripture. But at the age of 12, I was in attendance at a Bible conference, long out of existence, but it was called Sunrise Mountain Bible Conference, Lake George, New York. An appeal was made for anyone who would surrender to become a missionary. And I responded with all of my heart. But unwisely, in the course of those few days at Sunrise Mountain, on a hike with some of the other young people, I had sat down on a stump which, unbeknownst to me, was cushioned by poison ivy vines. And I got one horrendous case of poison ivy in those portions of my body it's best not to describe. For days I was unable to walk. I could not climb the stairs to my bedroom. I was laid out on the couch and left alone pretty much the bulk of the time. And for a period of several days, was drawn into an incredible struggle over what it meant to surrender for missionary service. For I felt the Lord saying to me, I wished you to make that surrender, but not to be a missionary, but to be a preacher of the gospel and to call my people to repentance and faith. I argued with the Lord not out of rebellion, honestly thinking he had made a mistake. I explained to him with great care that I could be a missionary. I had been working on a farm for 4 years, a truck farm, and I explained to the Lord I could put a track in every bushel basket of beans. I could in some fashion accompany each sale of vegetables with some kind of a witness, which I was more than willing to do. I could go to some dark part of the world and serve as an agricultural missionary, but I couldn't preach. And it was simply true. I could not. If called upon in public school to answer a question, I simply froze up. I could not answer. And so I struggled over the days with both my poison ivy and with what my surrender meant, until suddenly it became crystal clear that while it was absolutely true I could not preach, it was also true that God could, and he could use a frail vessel. And I simply said, Lord, if that's your choice, that's what you've got. Whatever there is of me is yours. And by God's grace, since that time, my heart has burned for the church to experience once again the manifest presence of God in her midst. Now, for weeks in thoughtful preparation for these days, I was investigating the term visit or visitation in the Scriptures, and honestly was somewhat surprised and a bit grieved to discover that the most frequent use of those terms in Scripture had to do with judgments and condemnations. Now, I really didn't want to come and speak on that subject, nor am I supposed to in actual fact. But I did discover that there were far fewer passages dealing with divine visitations that were of the positive revival sort than I had originally anticipated. But what I came to was a series of 4 messages on the subject of divine visitation, 3 drawn out of the book of Luke, and 4 out of the other book that the Holy Spirit inspired Luke to write, the book of Acts. And I want to take a moment or two to set in front of you the intention, at least. Now, as was agreed yesterday, the Lord is in charge here. And if I don't get to preach the second message tomorrow, or the third and the fourth next week, that's perfectly all right. But given divine permission and enablement, my intention is to speak this morning out of Luke chapter, not this morning, this afternoon, though I'm feeling energetic enough for it to be morning, but to speak this afternoon on that incredible song that Zacharias the priest wrote. What an incredible passage on divine visitations. Then, Lord willing, tomorrow, out of Luke again, chapter 3, those preparations that are necessary for divine visitation, using the words, the message of the son of Zacharias, John the Baptist. Then, while most of you won't be here, I hope next week to deal first with those incredibly sad words spoken by our Lord Jesus Christ to the bulk of the religious leaders of his day, recorded in Luke 19, verses 40 to 44, when he said to them, "You did not recognize your time of visitation." I have for years been under the heavy burden of realization that an incredible visitation could occur in our society and the church wouldn't recognize it. It amazes me even now why so few long for God's visit. I should think under the circumstances in which we find ourselves, the entire church would be on its face pleading with God to come again. But instead, there is every probability, unless something wonderful occurs, that the bulk of the church will miss the Lord's visit, if indeed he graces us with another revival. And in the last sermon, again, Lord willing, I intend to bring out of Acts chapter 3, where there is a simply unbelievable situation described, where Peter, addressing the very people that crucified our Lord, and even describing their action, he said to them, when Pilate had made up his mind to release Christ, you insisted, no, crucify him, give us a murderer instead. But repent and return and enjoy a season of refreshing from the presence of the Lord. So, divine visitations. Let us turn then to the book of Luke and pick up the matter in the first portion that we find concerning Zacharias. I need not comment extensively but it is certainly important that we at least read the passages where the Lord is confronting this man Zacharias. So Luke chapter 1, picking it up, please, at verse 5. In the days of Herod, king of Judea, there was a certain priest named Zacharias of the division of Abijah, and he had a wife from the daughters of Aaron, and her name was Elizabeth. And they were both righteous in the sight of God, walking blamelessly in all the commandments and requirements of the Lord. I wonder how many of us could ever have such a report written concerning our walk with the Lord. Verse 7, they had no child, because Elizabeth was barren, and they were both advanced in years. Now it came about while he was performing his priestly service before God in the appointed order of his division, according to the custom of the priestly office, he was chosen by lot to enter the temple of the Lord and burn incense. And the whole multitude of the people were in prayer outside at the hour of the incense offering. And an angel of the Lord appeared to him standing to the right of the altar of incense. And Zacharias was troubled when he saw him, for fear gripped him. But the angel said to him, "Do not be afraid, Zacharias, for your petition has been heard, and your wife Elizabeth will bear you a son, and you will give him the name John. And you will have joy and gladness, and many will rejoice at his birth. For he will be great in the sight of the Lord, and he will drink no wine or liquor, and he will be filled with the Holy Spirit while yet in his mother's womb. And he will turn back many of the sons of Israel to the Lord their God. And it is he who will go as a forerunner before him in the spirit and power of Elijah, to turn the hearts of the fathers back to the children, and the disobedient to the attitude of the righteous, so as to make ready a people prepared for the Lord." And Zacharias said to the angel, "How shall I know this for certain? For I am an old man, and my wife is advanced in years." And the angel answered and said to him, "I am Gabriel, who stands in the presence of God. I have been sent to speak to you and to bring you this good news. And behold, you shall be silent and unable to speak until the day when these things take place, because you did not believe my words, which shall be fulfilled in their proper time." And the people were waiting for Zacharias and were wondering at his delay in the temple. But when he came out, he was unable to speak to them. And they realized that he had seen a vision in the temple. And he kept making signs to them and remained mute. And it came about when the days of his priestly service were ended that he went back home. And after these days, Elizabeth, his wife, became pregnant. And she kept herself in seclusion for 5 months, saying, "This is the way the Lord has dealt with me in the days when he looked with favor upon me to take away my disgrace from among men." But turn now to the latter portion of the chapter, and let us pick up the reading once again. Her neighbors and her relatives, verse 58, heard that the Lord had displayed his great mercy toward her, and they were rejoicing with her. And it came about that on the 8th day they came to circumcise the child, and they were going to call him Zacharias after his father. And his mother answered and said, "No, indeed, but he shall be called John." And they said to her, "There's no one among your relatives who's called by that name." And they made signs to his father as to what he wanted him called. And he asked for a tablet, and he wrote as follows: "His name is John." And they were all astonished. And at once his mouth was opened and his tongue loosed, and he began to speak in praise of God. And fear came upon all those living around them. And all these matters were being talked about in all the hill country of Judea. And all who heard them kept them in mind, saying, "What then will this child turn out to be? For the hand of the Lord was certainly with him." And his father, Zacharias, was filled with the Holy Spirit and prophesied, saying, "Blessed be the Lord God of Israel, for he has visited us and accomplished redemption for his people, and has raised up a horn of salvation for us in the house of David his servant, as he spoke by the mouth of his holy prophets from of old, salvation from our enemies and from the hand of all who hate us, to show mercy toward our fathers and to remember his holy covenant, the oath which he swore to Abraham our father, to grant us that we, being delivered from the hand of our enemies, might serve him without fear, in holiness and righteousness before him all our days. And you, child, will be called the prophet of the Most High. For you will go on before the Lord to prepare his ways, to give to his people the knowledge of salvation by the forgiveness of their sins, because of the tender mercy of our God, with which the sunrise from on high shall visit us, to shine upon those who are in darkness and the shadow of death, to guide our feet into the way of peace. I trust that all of you understand the biblical issue of God's limited habitation. I say I trust you understand. I know full well the church, by and large, does not. Isaiah, in his 57th chapter and verse 15, makes a declaration we've got to pay strict attention to. Thus saith the high and the lofty one, who inhabits eternity, whose name is holy. I dwell in a high and lofty place, with him also who is broken and contrite, to revive the heart of the broken one, to revive the spirit of the contrite. God's habitation is severely limited to two places: the high and the lofty place, where he reigns and rules. And the only exception he makes is when he inhabits the heart, the spirit of the broken and the contrite. Now, the vast majority of professed Christians in America know nothing of brokenness and contrition. They know nothing now. They never knew anything. Nobody ever told them concerning God's limited habitation. Many who honestly believe they are Christians and are living in what they consider true assurance of faith are under the delusion that God lives anywhere and everywhere. And all you have to do is to say, "Come and inhabit me." And he has no choice but to dwell in the proud, in the arrogant, in the unholy, in those who love sin, in those who both give themselves to iniquity and push iniquity upon others. But in actual fact, there are only these two places where he dwells. Now, he may, in his providence, visit the arrogant. But normally those visits, as I reported earlier, are visits of condemnation. Visits in which he justifies his destruction of them by taking away their excuses. I don't know how many of you are preachers. I know personally I was troubled for a season in my life in going somewhere to preach and in observing the hardness of the heart.